Okay, I think we'll probably get close to starting. Thanks for coming along, and I see a couple of questions already, and it's good to see so many people here. Andrea, I produced, I see a question about the MD files. I produced a short video on this. I did send something to Teams about it, but you might not have seen it yet because I'm sure you guys are busy. But if you check the YouTube channel, you'll be able to find the link, and it'll explain to you how to use Atom, or you might be able to use some other tools to make it happen as well. Okay, so let's get back to questions a little bit later, but you can always mail me separately if you wish. Okay, I think we don't have the whole class here. I can see the viewers, but I think I'll get ready and make a start. Okay, this is week 2, and this is lecture 3. It's going to be a CSS overview today because this section, including today's lecture and the pre-recorded lessons that we'll have on Friday, all have to do with presenting content with cascading style sheets. So up until now, I'm sure that you'll remember that we talked about last time we talked about structure, that's layout if you like, presentation, and interactivity has been 3 features associated with web pages, if you want, or content that you want to see or engage with in a web environment. So we looked at structure last week, and you've done some work with looking at structure on your own, and you'll see from the assignment that you have this week, for example, that you've got to build this pyramid, this food pyramid, and it has a very specific structure. So you're going to have to figure out how do I make elements, div elements, for you, if you like, in HTML that are trapezoidal or triangular, and how do I stack them and layer them? So you can think about the structural elements there with that. We have to look at the colors and organize them relative to each other. So that's about layout as well, and presentation, and that really needs to some CSS to make that happen. And if we want to make them clickable in terms of your assignment, then we'll see early next week how to do some basic JavaScript to do this. But you could look ahead, of course, and figure out how to make it work too. But for now, let's start with thinking about CSS. So again, we're in week 2, and just for the records, I guess, we can see that we're looking at presenting content. Today's lecture is the live stream, and Friday's lectures, which are pre-recorded and will be available in Moodle. And we'll talk a little bit about that a little bit later, once I have a few more people in the stream. Okay, okay, I have a note to myself which says, remember to ask about this lecture too. Well, I suppose now is as good a time to do it, and if you're here, then I should address this. I've had a couple of queries from you guys about whether I could release the content, the pre-recorded content, a little bit earlier in the week. Now, this is there are lots of reasons for not doing this. One, well, first and foremost, the timetable says that you should get this on Fridays. I would prefer if you had it on Tuesdays, but Tuesdays are really busy for you, and the timetabling moved it, so we can't really give it to you then in terms of the timetable. And but the material is pre-recorded and ready, and I'm usually a little bit ahead, and so I could release it anytime after this lecture. So I could release it this evening, or Wednesday, or Thursday, or Friday. The downside sometimes of doing this is that when you release things earlier, students sometimes feel some compulsion to they have to get to the material immediately, and then they want to rush into it and so forth. And I do like to leave a little bit of time, but I guess I could still make it earlier, and then you could look at it on Fridays during the scheduled time if you wanted. But if you had a little bit of time beforehand, you could do this and look at it yourself. So it's up to you guys, really, I suppose, as to whether you'd like to have it a little bit early. So does that seem okay? I mean, does anybody want to say anything into the chat that would give me some indicator of what your current thinking is? I don't mind, but you will need, yes, okay, Dara, you will need to look at the content, okay, in order to be able to complete assignment 1. It'll help. It tells you about CSS and finishes CSS. And then, yes, so I'm happy to do that with you as well, Okay, I mean, you all have a voice here, really, but I don't want you to feel pressured to look at this, okay? But I do think it's probably not a bad idea to look at the assignments, really, in some respects. So, okay, so, but it can put pressure on people, and I do realize this. So I'm happy to make it available. I mean, I have the work done and it's ready for you, and but the important thing is that we don't need to have anything else added to that slot, so that you do have something, you have it a little bit earlier. But you do have that slot on Fridays as well. So, but I need to get some feedback from you on this, please, if that's okay. So maybe we could have a look at this. Perhaps, maybe we'll see. I don't think you can see where this sits just now, but you can have a look. And let's see if we can do this for you. Let's move the chat a little. Okay, so I think this poll should be open, so I'll leave this poll for you, and you could choose up to 2 items, okay? And I'm happy with this, so if you want to let me know how you feel about it, you can add to it. So I can see even straight away that Tuesdays and Wednesdays have some traction. So that's fine, but as I said already, sometimes there's some pressure to do this, and I don't want to. So improve the lighting here a little bit better to be able to see something. Okay, so I'm going to leave that there for a little bit, and I'll work ahead with the lectures. You can see the poll, and if somebody's asking where the poll is, there, if you go to, as it is on the screen, if you go to menti.com, and you can use the code 1857267 in order to be able to see that. Okay, okay. So anyway, it's something I can work on. Okay, so yep, we'll go from there. I mean, if it does get released earlier, and you're one of the 6 people who currently feel that Friday is best for you, well, you can still look at it on Friday in that time, if that's the way you want to manage your timetable. Okay, so I'm not stopping the count for a while yet, and you can choose up to 2 things, okay, as well. But I need to get on with the lecture. Okay, so let's get back to this. Okay. Okay, thanks for participating in this poll. It's really useful for me, please. Thank you very much. I'll stop the lecture in a few minutes. So we want to look at cascading style sheets. And so CSS, or cascading style sheets, that describes how HTML elements are displayed. And that can be on screen, paper, or in other media. It saves a lot of work. It can control the layout of multiple web pages all at once. The styles can be either dynamically applied using simple commands. There's a great demo of some fantastic dynamic style changes on the W3 School CSS homepage, and you can click through the link on these slides when you get them, and you can figure out how to do this. So it's no problem with doing that. We won't do it just now. But you can save then your CSS styles in files and dynamically select the one that you wish to use with a single page or a complete website based on your preferences. And that will be really, really important for accessibility as well. So, and that's kind of important as well, because you'll see how sometimes we might need to have different kinds of accessibility. If you might want to have, you might have vision issues, and you want to get high contrast text or something on screen, and you can still have the content and change the way it's presented. And cascading style sheets allow us to be able to do all of this. Okay, so there are 3 ways to work with CSS. There's inline, internal, and external CSS. Okay, so the inline method is a method that you use to include the CSS directly into your HTML elements. So here then we make use of the style attribute, okay? And the style attribute can be attached to most tags that have some form of presentation for it. So here's a header style, header1, h1, and you can have a style here. So that allows us to be able to provide localized elements, and that will override any other elements that or any other styles associated with it. So we can have an internal CSS as well, and we can use the style element in the headed section, for example, in order to make this happen. And it's called internal styling. And you have external CSS or external styling, and that allows you to be able to use a style sheet. Okay, and their style sheets have a .css extension, and you can include that in the link using a link element. And then we can actually add this style to all of our style sheets. So we could, for example, put h1 color blue style.css and make it work and here like this. So there's lots of ways of doing this. You can use any of them or all of them. Okay. So let's quickly just go back and stop that poll while that's ongoing. I see that people would maybe like to have it a little bit earlier. Okay, so I'm going to close the voting now. Thank you very much for participating there. Okay, so why is it called a cascade? Okay, so we know what style sheets are. They help us styling various elements, and but the cascading name comes from the specific priority scheme that we use to determine which style rules apply if more than one rule matches a particular element. So this cascading priority scheme is predictable, so you should be very easily able to figure out what style will be applied. So they're read in three ways. So you start off, first and foremost, you have the browser defaults. Then you have the internal style sheets in the head, or the external style sheets that are used via an import or a link command. And then we have the inline styles. So the default priority order is browser defaults, external, internal, and inline. So for example, if you're kind of person that likes to have your own, you might have your own style sheets that you apply to all of your web pages, and you can save that in your browser. So you might have a dark theme, for example, that overrides all the existing styles. So it's a useful thing to do. And it all happens with CSS. If two rules have the exact same weight, then the latter definition wins priority. So imported style sheets and internal style sheets actually carry the exact same weight, but since imported styles are considered to be before any rules in the style sheet itself, the latter will win. It's the internal. Okay, so sometimes you might say, well, why isn't this working the way I would expect? Usually there's an issue around what's happening in the cascade, and you're missing out on what you think the cascade will be. So, or your understanding of the cascade. And so you need to figure out a little bit about how it might work for yourself. Okay. So the rule priorities then are really, really important here. So the name cascading comes from the specified priority scheme to determine which rules apply if more than one rule matches a particular element. And that's as I said, that's predictable. And as I said, we want to work with defaults, external, internal, and inline. If you get those, you will be fine. Okay, but that's not always the case, because if you have multiple style tags inside your head, the second one, if that uses an import rule to import an external style sheet, there are all sorts of validity rules that can be broken here. So using an import after an internal style sheet when import should be loaded first, for example, and so really there are ways to do things, and it's a good idea that you could actually look at good practice. I'm going to click through on this one here because it's really worthwhile looking at this website about when you shouldn't use import. So I think it's really important. I'll give you the link in there, and it tells you a little bit about how to get your styles, so forth. I haven't really told you about the link about imports, because link is preferable at all the time over import. But you'll see it used, and I would prefer if you didn't use it. But if you use it, you've got a little bit more work to do, and you'll be fine as long as you understand how it works. The other problem, of course, is that import blocks parallel downloads. That means that the browser will have to wait for a file to be imported and finish downloading before start downloading the rest of the content. And that's problems with all sorts of imports. And we see this when we're trying to build websites. We want them to be fast. We want them to load quickly. We also want to be able to preload if we can a lot of the time. So you may see people use Bootstrap, for example. Well, Bootstrap, is a great styling library, and you can pick it up from from Twitter, you can pick it up from Microsoft, you can pick it up from Google. There's a whole bunch of APIs that are there, and you can load that and have it preloaded. But if you're going to start using imports on your site, it can slow down really dramatically. So we don't want to see that. Try to use link instead of import. Takeaway. Okay, so now let's have a look at what are called selectors, CSS selectors. So the CSS are used. CSS file. Sorry, is there a question coming in there? It's better to have the CSS file relative. Yeah, I think it's fine. We tend not to hard code these things. A lot of time you want to, because if you want to move it around, so Gmoney, you're on the money. Yeah, we try to make it relative to where we are, because if you start moving sites around and it's not relative, then there's a problem. Okay. Yes, there are some benefits to using imports, and if you look at that link through, I think you'll give you some information on doing that. Okay. Okay. So good. Right. So CSS selectors then are used to find or select the element you want to style. So this is how it works. Okay. So you have elements on your page, and then you select those using a set of rules, and you apply a style to them. And that's what happens. That's what the browser is doing. Okay. So it's a very nice way to make it all work together. And there are 5 categories of CSS selectors. And can we see some examples of them in a little while? Okay. There are simple selectors. So they select an element based on the name, the ID, or class. Then there's combinator selectors, and they select elements based on the relationships between elements. So if you have a div element followed by another div element, or you have a div element that has embedded inside another div element, then you can set up rules to show how the embedded div should work relative to the outer div. There are pseudo class selectors, and they select elements based on state. Pseudo class elements. These are really important. Well, there are pseudo elements selectors, and they select and style parts of an element. And that's really interesting, because you might think that, well, what's an element? And if an element like a div tag, you say, well, how could a div element have a particular part by itself? If you think of a paragraph or a header, if you think about a header, where would you have a different part of a header? Okay, because it's just H1, open up something and then ends H1, for example. So maybe, could any of you maybe come back to me? Let me think about, well, how could a header have, or an element have more than one part if it's just a header? Any ideas? No? We might be getting a little bit of latency, of course, issue here, but yes, before and after the header itself. No, it's not nested per se. It's a header. So you could say, yes, here's my header, or here's an element that sits within the web page, and just before that element actually exists, and just after that element, it's that space, if you like, in between the elements. Okay, so after one element begins and the next one starts, or after another element ends and this one begins. So these are the pseudo elements, and it's pretty good. Like, it's not a link, not an amalgamation, it's not included margins. And they're good questions, they're good at these. And yeah, you're thinking about holistically about the whole page and so forth, but actually it relates to the individual elements themselves, or tags, if you like. So we see a bit about that a little bit later, okay? And then there are attribute selectors. So that means you select elements based on an attribute or an attribute value. We might have seen some of these already. Okay, so there are some really good examples of all of those categories, and I'm using the W3 Schools CSS tutorial as a reference site. I'm trying to align it with some of this so that you'll be able to copy and go and find the examples yourself. Okay, so here are some basic and fundamental ones. Okay, the element selector then selects HTML elements based on the element's name. So you can set the style of the P element, or the P tag. Okay. So for example, here is an element selector P, and what it's doing is it's selecting the alignment of that paragraph and setting it to be centered. Okay. And it's setting the color of that paragraph to be blue. So really what's happened is this text will be blue and it will be centered. Okay, so that, and the way to do this, okay, is to, you know, when you get my slides, you can take something, let's go back up a page. You can look at this text here. You can copy this, for example, and you can open up your VS Code, and you can, you know, maybe look at creating a style section here. Typing's really bad today, okay? And now I'm creating style element here. And so I've copied this and I'm saying here is the situation here, the selection that we've generated. And this one here on the, we have a paragraph there on the bottom, as you can see, which was a paragraph. Save this and we can have a look in my favorite browsers, Vivaldi. You can see here's a paragraph that's centered. So we've controlled the style based on our selection here. We've said that this applies to all elements, in fact. So the next time I have another paragraph, it will be centered as well. So if I create another paragraph, let's say this is, I can reload this, and I've got another paragraph. So all paragraphs are going to behave this way. Okay, so that's a bit of a limitation because we might not want all paragraphs to work like that. We might just want headings to work like that. And so, you know, this is something we want to worry about. So this, you'll notice that this is copied across, so it will ignore any commands that are in the style section. Okay, so that works kind of nice, and we can change it to red if we want. Here, reload, and we've changed these. So this is how we would select all paragraphs, essentially, because we're working with that element selection for the paragraphs, the tag. Okay, and of course, we can now use the ID selector. That uses the ID attribute of some HTML element to select a specific element. So the ID of the element is unique within the page. So the ID selector is used to select one unique specific element. So if we want to select an element with a specific ID, then we write a hash character followed by the ID of the element. You don't include a hash character when you're using the selector on the tag, of course, but this is just how it works. So let's have a look at here. We see here's an ID selector, and we're saying that anything that's tagged with para1 should have text align that's centered and color red, and then we can make this work, and we can specifically set this up. Okay, so let's try that from an example here. So we have a default setting here for our paragraphs. So let's have another one, and we're setting this color here. We make a regular paragraphs blue, and now let's make so here's a paragraph. This is a paragraph. So they should be all blue now, okay? Because we haven't specifically given any identification. Let's have a look at our Vivaldi. So it's blue, and that's fine. That's what we expect. So now let's go back and say we want to make a paragraph 1, okay? And we will say P. So now we've created a paragraph and given an ID to this particular one. So we've identified this one here, and we'll save this and load. And we've selected, we've selected that individual paragraph by ID, and we've applied the style just to that paragraph. So this is a useful thing to be able to do. So when we're dealing with it, so you can have default styles, and then you can have a unique style. Okay. So we can also collect a class. Okay, so we can select the HTML elements that have a specific class attribute. And so to select an element with a specific class, we write a dot character followed by the class name. And you can apply that class to any element or restrict the class to a specific element. So if you look at the examples on the right-hand side, we use the first class selection rule, and then we use the P and span text in both elements. They'll be centered and green. If we use the second rule, then only the paragraphs will have that. So let's have a look at these. So we have on the right here, we have we've set up a class called .center. and we're saying, we're giving this name, okay? This is not a built-in one. We decided that this is what it's going to be, okay? So we're calling it, and we could have called it bananas. It didn't matter, okay? So this one is going to be centered in green, and then we can say p.center is also going to be centered in green. So we can apply that to this. So p class center, what color is this? P class center, what color is this one? Let's have a look at it. So we want to think a little bit about this now. Well, first of all, we'll take this from here. We'll copy, we'll go to our styles, we'll change we'll save this. So now we have these two, it's okay. And now we'll just get rid of all this stuff in here. We go back to the lecture notes, and we'll take these. We have a paragraph tag and we have a span tag. And we're saying that the class or paragraphs will be, we're using this class and we're using this class. And we could actually change the color for the P. We say the general center is green, and we could change this color to be blue, for example. If we wanted to do that, we could do this as well. So let's reload this, and the color is green, and the color is green. Because really, we decided to do this. So we notice that this is using the class center, and this one is using the p.center. Okay. Okay. Let's move on. Okay, so there's a universal selector in place as well. Okay, and that selects every HTML element in the document. So that's, we use the star. So we can force everything to be selected, and we can give the text alignment to be read in the color to be read. We can use a grouping selector, which is a comma. That allows us to be able to group these elements, H1, H2, P, and we can align these as well, okay, to be green and be centered if we want. But important is the comma that allows us to select groups. And if we use the second rule, and only the P will have that style. What happens if we include both rules? Well, you can try these yourself, okay? Yes, sorry, I'm just looking at the thing. So, you know the way you write color green, is there a way to use hex? Yes, you can use the RGB values if you wish, the red, green, blue components, and you can select those. And but for the examples here, these colors are fine. A lot of them will be understood by HTML5 as a set. Okay, so it's fine. And again, if you use the graphics, you'll get you just get a graphics app. You'll get the detail for that. Okay. Okay, so we an important one that I think sometimes people have issues with is this one on combinators. So a CSS combinator is something that explains the relationship between the selectors. So a CSS selector can contain more than one simple selector. So between the simple selectors, we can include a combinator. Now, if we look in the previous one, we had commas in between these, which said divs and paragraphs. If this was div comma p, this would be divs and paragraphs have this rule. But if we have other ways of doing this. There are 4 combinators. We could have a space between the 2 elements. We could have a greater than symbol. We could have a plus symbol, and we can have a tilde symbol. So the first one, the space, tells us that this is a descendant selector. The next one, the arrow, is a child selector. And then we have an adjacent sibling selector, which is a plus, and a general sibling selector, which is tilde. But it tells us then descendants. In other words, paragraphs, which are descendants of divs, should be yellow. Paragraphs, which are children of divs, should be yellow. Adjacent paragraphs, which are adjacent siblings, should be yellow. And general sibling selectors, paragraphs anywhere after a div, okay, and will have a background color. Of course, if they're all the exact same, then it doesn't make it particularly interesting. So what we'll try to do now is have a little quiz. see if we can get this working. Okay. So now, we're going to have another little quiz in a second. And I want you to think about these. I'm going to something be prepared for you here. Let's say we have this situation. So you might want to have a look at this, think a little bit about it. Let's say we set this up so that our descendant, paragraphs who are descendants from divs, have a yellow background color. Paragraphs that are children of divs have an orange background color. Siblings, general siblings, have a green color, and adjacent siblings have a blue color. Okay. So you got that? Descendants are yellow, children are orange, general siblings are green, and adjacent siblings are blue. So what happens here? So I'm interested then in what color. So we have a div followed by a paragraph, followed by a section, followed by a paragraph, all inside that div. Then we have a paragraph and another paragraph. So there are 5 paragraph tags here: P1, P2, P3, P4, and P5. So thinking about those, what will the colors be? What will the color of the individual lines be? Okay. Span is just another tag, which is a non-breaking tag, Jordan. And yeah, but let's focus on the question just here now. So what color, if we know that these are the colors. So a div, you have a paragraph following a div, can be yellow as a descendant. A child tag, paragraph which is a child of a div, will be orange. A general sibling of div will be green, and then just an adjacent sibling will be blue. P1, P2, P3, P4, P5. What will the order of the colors be? Think about that for a second. Let's see what you think. You can have a think about it. Go here. If any talk. Want to participate in this quiz then? Okay, so we've had 2 contributors at this stage. I'll flick back to the screen. If you've got the Mentimeter open and you're having a look and you've got the Mentimeter there, then we can have a peek and see. So let me switch back so that you can see the code. So this was the okay. So paragraph which is a descendant of a div is yellow. A paragraph which is a child of div is orange. A paragraph which is a general sibling of div is green, and a paragraph which is an adjacent sibling is blue. Here as well. Okay. And maybe some information here for you that might help you a little bit with choosing this. Okay. So the descendant selector matches all elements that are descendants of a specific element. And so this example, for example, selects all P elements inside div elements. The child selector selects all elements that are children of a specific element. So the example selects the P elements that are children of a div element. Okay. And yeah, I'll show you the CSS. There's some, actually this is the CSS, it's similar. I've just reversed two of the items there. The adjacent sibling selects all elements that are adjacent immediately following the siblings of a specified element. Sibling elements have to have the same parent elements. The example selects all P elements that are placed immediately after the div elements. And the general sibling selector selects all elements that are siblings of a specified element. So the example selects all the P elements that are siblings of div elements. Okay. So it's worthwhile doing this and seeing do you understand this. Okay. Of course I have them as green, but I'll switch that back because I was asked, and so here's the action. Descendants are yellow, children are orange, siblings are green, and adjacent siblings are blue. Here we go. Okay. Any thoughts? Okay, so we've had a good bit of participation in this. It's good of you to participate. Thank you. It's why it's here. Look, if you get the answer right, great. If you get the answer wrong, great. We learned something either ways, okay? We've either learned something now or we've learned that we didn't know it and we'll fix it and correct it. So don't be afraid to try it and get it wrong, or try it and get it right. You know, it's nothing wrong with this. Okay, so I'm going to close it now, and we'll switch back to I'm going to close it now for now, and I'm going to just show you final quiz. Okay, so most people thought it was optional. Okay, orange, yellow, orange, green, green. Let's see what it was. Orange, yellow, orange, blue, green. Okay. And it would be worthwhile maybe reviewing this lecture and going back and have a look and see. I'll give you the code, of course, again, and I'll give you the examples and have a look at this. So it gives you a sense of trying to understand. So even with simple lines of code, we can sometimes get it right or we can sometimes get it wrong, but you know, we can't be guessing. We need to be absolutely certain of how this works, and that's why we do this simple little exercise. Okay, so okay, that's good. Good work, and those of you who got it right, well done. Those of you who didn't get it right, hopefully you can figure out why you didn't get it right and then learn from there, and that's good learning. Remember, if you're making mistakes and correcting them, you're always learning. It's about fun, you know. It's not about being wrong always. Okay, let's get back to this. Okay, so early on I talked a little bit, or at the beginning of the lecture, I talked a little bit about the fact about what does pseudo elements and pseudo classes, you know, what is this space before and after, you know, the element itself, you know, that in between spaces, if you like, and just want to be able to do something. That's kind of something interesting, and you would need these actually if you want to make trapezoids from divs. Clue for your assignments. Okay, so first of all, let's have a look at pseudo classes. We just need a quick drink, sorry. So pseudo classes, they're used to define a special state of an element. So for example, it can be used to style an element when the user mouses over it, or the styles visited and unvisited look differently. For example, that references the history and the state. A style an element when it gets focused by clicking or tabbing. So these are useful activities. Okay, so these are pseudo classes. Pseudo classes can be combined with CSS classes. So for example, if we look down here, we have an interesting one, which is we want to highlight a.highlight : hover. Tells us that the background color should be yellow. And then we might have something here where we have an A class, which is an anchor class, an anchor link. The class is highlight because that's what we called it. A highlight is the name. Okay, and then we're specifically saying when we hover, we can do something, and that's a useful thing. So will we try this? I think we'll move this across into our VS Code, and this is something I do, folks. I mean, I think it's a useful way to learn. So if you're you're at a lecture, or it's hard to keep up with this stuff, but if you want to look at a repeat lecture, or you're looking at some of my notes, or you're looking at something you find on the web, it's always a good idea to have your VS Code open, have a sample or template document there that you can just put the code into and try it and see, and then make changes to the code and see how it works for you. It's a very, very useful thing to do, and I do it all the time myself when I'm coding. You can use JS Fiddle or CodePen as well, of course, to have a look at this, and it would be something worth doing. So let's have a look and go back to our code. So let's go back to the lecture. We don't really need any of this stuff. We can just always do it again. This is just a scratch file. Really, that's what's going on here. And so let's now go back to. Let's have a look at this. So we're interested in this one down here. So let's use this selector, copy it, head into our document. Okay, so we saved this here. So it's nice that saved this code. Okay, so now we can go back and just get the piece of information we were interested in doing, and we can paste that in here. That's nicely saved in here. And now we can just go to lecture, and again, I've just opened in Vivaldi already. Tab here. Reload page here, click me, and you can see that when I hover, I'm getting the yellow background. So that was all handled by CSS. This is how you do this and how you practice. Okay, yeah, the voting ended. I didn't want to hang around too much because I wanted you to be able to focus on the next one. Okay, but anyway, those are the pseudo classes. So there's a few of those that you can work. So there are lots of pseudo classes. There's a nice list available on the W3 Schools. You can click the link in the slides. Oh, what happened there? I've lost a little bit of view there. Okay. Oh, we're back. Okay. So you can click to actually view it, and you can have a peek at this stuff here. So lots of CSS classes. Pseudo class names are not case sensitive. And some work, some don't. Older browsers may have issues rendering stuff, so you might have to look at that, but it's worthwhile. You can copy this whole page if you like, copy all of this, see what happens. Code, and we'll do this. Reload. Okay, so this is how it works. And this is an interesting one, because if we look at the things, it tells us, this is the bit we're interested in. We're telling us that here's the style, okay? And it tells us for paragraphs and the I tag, which is, in other words, if we have an I tag here following our P tag, the first child, in other words, the first one of these I tags, we color blue. The rest of them we ignore. And that's why it works. So the first one here's the paragraph. I am a strong, and here we have an I person. I am a strong person. Here we have the second one in the paragraph. So it's a child of this particular paragraph tags. Make that blue. We've done this. It's really, really nice. Okay, it's very, very nice. Note that if you're using older browsers, you may have to do some. Okay, so we can do all sorts of really interesting stuff and control using these pseudo classes. Pseudo elements then are really, really interesting and allow us to do some really, really fancy styling management. We can use the CSS pseudo element to style specific parts of an element. It can be used to style the first letter of a line of an element. Insert content before or after the content of the element. So we have some selector followed by the pseudo element and its property. So here on the right, we have a paragraph, and we're saying the first letter should be this color font and this font size. And somebody asked earlier in the chat about the RGB, okay, and you can see how we would specify just the same way as we wanted to specify. It's no problem doing that. We can also look at the first line pseudo element to add special style to the first line of text. So this example formats the first line of all of the text in P elements. First line, first element should be. You can try all this yourself. So I copy these, put it into a file like I've been doing, and you can see how to make these things work and practice. So there's a couple of things here that's worth remembering. So when you are, there's two things we need to do. You look at an assignment and you try to solve the problem that's there. Okay, and then you try to look for solutions or look for code or something that will help with what you're trying to do. The other option, of course, is you go this way and you learn about the various elements, and then you say, well, what scenarios could I use those? And then you end up, knowing how to do lots and lots of different small things, and you see how you might apply them in a particular context. So it's worthwhile looking at both things, look at trying to figure out the elements that might work here, and then having a stock of elements and tricks and things that you might do so that you can use them when required. So it's something that you have to learn how to do yourself. Okay, and it comes with practice, and after a little bit of a while, it'll just come second nature. Okay, so there was another question there somewhere. If I'm using VS Code, exclamation mark, and then tab, will give you HTML boilerplate. Yeah, of course, yeah. There's all sorts of VS Code is super. It does all sorts of fancy stuff like this, and I'd certainly recommend using those where possible. And thanks, Jonathan, for bringing it and adding it to the chat. That's really good. Good stuff. Okay, so two pseudo elements that I really like playing with are the before and after pseudo elements. So they can be used to insert content before the content of the element. Okay, so the following example inserts an image before the content of each H1 element. So for example, so with every H1, I can always add in a smiley face, for example, before one. And there's a list of properties available for all those pseudo elements. You can check the online lists. The after pseudo element can be used to insert some content after the content of an element. So that this one inserts a smiley after the H1 element. Okay? Notice that we use the double colon to replace the single colon notation for pseudo elements in CSS3. And that was an attempt from the W3C, which is the World Wide Web Consortium, to distinguish between pseudo classes and pseudo elements. So the single colon syntax was used for both pseudo classes and pseudo elements in CSS2 and CSS1, and they're accepted for backward compatibility. But so you need to realize that CSS and HTML, all that stuff comes from standards documents. And there are organizations like the W3C that manage all these standards. So it's worthwhile having a look at them. We haven't time to go into all the details on the standards, but they are standards and they're evolving all of the time. There's another property. You'll have seen the content CSS property used with the before and after. Or maybe you missed it. Okay, content here tells us what content we're going to put in. So you'll have seen this already, and it is a well-defined syntax. It can be only used with these pseudo elements, the ones that it provides, and it provides extra control over content arrangement, so you can manage them in a way. And again, there's a full list of the content property values in w3schools.com and elsewhere. Okay, but the link also has examples for every property value. It's really, really worth looking at. Okay, this one here. Okay, really worthwhile. This example on the right-hand side here removes the standard HTML bullets and replaces them with bullets. Why? Because you can. Okay, but you could replace them with something else if you wanted. Okay, so I'm replacing like this. So what I'm doing is here, I'm taking a list. I'm telling a little bit about how lists should work, how the padding should change. Here's what an unordered list looks like. And these are all tags UL, LI, LI. But I'm telling you here that the content, I'm replacing the content with this dot here. And so I'm adding this new padding. I'm changing it a little. I can do all that fun stuff myself. Why? Because I can. Okay? And because sometimes we might want to do something. Okay. So that's good, okay? It's really nice, okay? You can't, something to note though, I could have changed it with like all sorts of other fun things. You can use smileys from bullets if I want. So final note is that you cannot dynamically give a pseudo class to an element with JavaScript. But always with web dev, there's this this phrase here called Timmy Toady. Okay, and that means there's more than one way to do it. I see. Check this example. Let's go there and see. So here you can click, try it. Oh yeah, so this is just manipulating. You can go back and have it. Okay, so it's worthwhile doing this. So you can have workarounds. Okay, you can have workarounds. Anyway, we tried to make this happen without scripting. Okay, so we have to think about rule priority. Okay, I have a little bit of time. I'm going to tell you a little bit about this, but we'll come to it again. Okay, so we saw that the priorities related to the default internal, external, and inline declarations of CSS selection rules. When multiple style sheets are used, the style sheets may be in conflict when it comes to control of a particular selector. So in these situations, there has to be some additional rule as to which style sheet's rule will win. And these characteristics here determine the outcome of contradictory style sheets. So this one is plain important, okay? So this important rule, then the origin of rules, the author's rules versus the reader's rules. There are selector rules where you calculate specificity, and these order specification. Okay, so you can have any rule and make it important, okay? Like we've done here. Anything that's important, the style that's designated important will win out over all contradictory styles, otherwise equal weight. Since both the author and the reader can specify important rules, the author's rule would override the reader's rule. And so that's a useful thing to know. So when you define a rule with important attribute that discards the normal concerns as regards the latter rule overriding the earlier one. So it's used for overriding the styles that are previously declared in other style sources in order to achieve a particular design. Designers like to do this. You will have to think a little bit about this. Is this good or bad? You know, you might say, well, I want as a reader to be able to override the styles because I might have some issue where I want to, where I might have a difficulty reading. I might have color blindness. I might have some accessibility option. So it's really important that we would be able to look at that and decide, well, why should the author have more control over the reader? But then the authors might say, I want it to look this way. Tough. You know, we have to think about this. So the original use case and the reasons these rules exist is called user style sheets, as I said. So you can have a custom style sheet written by you that tells the browser how to work. And you can find these very easily. I'll leave it to this slide here. I'm not going to go through all of this, but it's worthwhile trying it and looking at it yourself and finding these. But the rules that you can set your own preferences and they can apply to all websites. You have to be very specific in terms of your selectors that are general to apply to all sites like the body tag. You know, but that has very low specificity and is likely to be beaten by websites' own styles. So important rules allow you to write generic selectors, but they have the power to change things, and you should think a little bit. But there are lots of ways of calculating this rule specificity. Okay, so you could have looking at descriptions like 001 rather than 0001. I use the 0001 as I prefer the latter to use and I use the Mozilla developer guidelines, which use 4-element tuples. Okay, you just see the numbers without any tuple structure. So how do you calculate this? So we know that an element selector has low specificity and can be overwritten by a class. So essentially, a value in points is awarded for each different type of selector, and adding up all these points gives you the weight of a particular selector, which can be then assessed against other matches. So the amount of specificity of a selector has is measured using 4 values or components. And that can be thought of as thousands, hundreds, tens, and ones, simple digits like. This is how it works. The CSS attribute selector matches the elements based on the presence or value of a given element or attribute, sorry, and that might help your interpretation of the third row up here. So you can have a full, I mean, this is the real theoretical background stuff. I don't expect you to get this in minutes or seconds or hours. You know, you can spend a little bit of time a little bit later on this. So you can click here to get a full explanation of the table. I'm trying to include some information here for you, but I know it's tough, okay? And but I want you to have a complete set of information, and you can look at this in your own time, okay? It's not essential that you know the details just now. What it is important is that you need to know that sometimes when you've got conflict, certain which rules apply. The ones that are loaded, the ones that are in the document itself, loaded externally, the important ones, the ones that are in the browser, all that stuff. Okay, so you need to look at that. Okay, so we have to think about the origins of the rules as well. So sometimes authors and readers are in conflict because they have the ability to specify their own style sheets. When rules between these two conflicts, the author's rules win out over the reader's rules. Is that a good thing? Well, depends on who the author and the reader are. Okay? You just have to be careful. And I guess the sum or the takeaway here is that if you're using important on a rule, then you have to be careful of it. Okay, here's a rule. Way to remember all that stuff. When two rules have the same weight, the last rule specified weights. Okay, that's not a bad way to think. Okay, all the theory can boil down to simple stuff like that. Okay, we can have a little bit of a look over layout, and I will probably cover some of this in some of the later lectures. But you need to know a little bit about the display property, whether things are blocks or inlines, and we'll cover these in the lessons. It's useful. We should think about something. Let's maybe quickly have a look at this. Okay, we don't really talk about layout in CSS, but you'll see all about this when you look at your assignment. Okay, so I do more of it in the lessons. Okay, the display property is really what's important. Okay? And it controls layout, and it specifies how and if an element is displayed. So every element has a default display value, depending on the kind of element. So the element display value is mostly block or inline. So a block level element always starts on a new line and takes up the full width available. It stretches out to the left and right as far as it can. And an inline element doesn't start at a new line and only takes up as much width as necessary. So somebody asked the question earlier, what's a span? Well, a div expands to all, is a block level element, and expands to all space, and then the span is an inline element and it only takes up as much space as necessary. The display none, you sometimes see that when you use JavaScript, more next week on that, allows you to hide and show elements. Okay, and the script element uses display none by default, for example. So every element has a display value. You can override it, of course, changing an inline element to a block element or vice versa. It can be useful for making the page look in a particular way. So for example, you can make inline elements for horizontal menus by changing the display property. So setting the display property of an element changes how the element is displayed, not what kind of element it is. So an inline element with display block is not allowed to have other block elements inside it. Okay, so there's all sorts of rules, and we'll see a little bit of that. Okay, that's it for today. A lot of stuff. It gets a bit tough near the end, but thank you for sticking with me, and we'll see a little bit more about this in the lessons. And based on the poll that we did a little bit earlier, I will release them a little bit earlier. Okay, a lot of material. Don't get too stressed if it's too much too soon. You're meant to go back and look at these over time, and it'll come to you with practice. Okay, thanks again, and thanks for coming and for paying attention and participating in the polls and typing in the chat. It all works really well for us, and I hope you learned something. So have a great evening, and good luck with the lab. Don't forget, you can always email me, send me a message in Teams. If you need help, look for it. Okay, thank you very much, folks. Bye bye.